if you were reading today the characterization of One Belt, One Road, you would think this was some kind of malevolent tactic to get control of the world on the part of the Chinese.
美国投行家约翰桑顿谈一带一路时，反对把它简单解释成控制世界。这未必就是结论，但中国为何总把发展、贸易和合作放在一起？
And at the same time, the concentration of wealth will get worse. So, for example, the U.S. and China today are something like 42% of global GDP. In the year 2050, no one really knows, of course, but it's going to be somewhere between 50 and 60%. So two countries will have 50 or 60% of the world's wealth, and there'll be 2 billion more poor people. Now, we already know what it looks like when you have that kind of inequality, both within countries and across countries. Just about everything you can think about is not good. Migration, disease, terrorism, climate change, etc. So I look at that and I say to myself, if we had any kind of, as it were, strategic planning going on for the world, raise your hand if you think it's a good idea that in that world I just described, that the world's, pick your number, most powerful, wealthiest 10 countries, 5 countries, or how about the 2 countries? Who thinks it's a good idea that in that world, those 2 countries should spend most of their time fighting with each other? I mean, it can't make any sense at all. And so I look at that world and I say to myself, well, wait a minute. Right now, the way I feel about it, it's like we're heading over a cliff. We're persuading ourselves, and it's kind of like a escalating negative game. Both sides are persuading themselves that the other one's nefarious, malevolent, and it's getting worse and worse, and it can't make any sense. And so then I scratch my head and say, well, now how are we going to get ourselves out of this trap? Out of this trap? And it's not obvious, particularly when you have regard to what I said a minute ago about Hofstadter, because our own country domestically is going to be, in my opinion, politically ill for a while. So with that, if I can call it that, reality, that makes the task that much more difficult. So there are only 2 things I'm kind of I'm hoping will exist. One is that other countries will in fact increasingly over time, more forcefully, say to the United States and China, I'm sorry, it's simply not acceptable for the 2 of you not to have a constructive relationship. The world cannot exist if that's the case, and you got to stop it. A decent relationship. And China, by the way, is already the largest trading partner with 140 of those countries. And China, I was just in China earlier this week, listening to there's a new sort of, well, a more prominent form of a term of art the Chinese are using called Chinese modernization. And they're determined to illustrate to the world that modernization and westernization are not synonymous. And that modernization can take different forms in different countries. And I was listening to the foreign minister lay all this out, and among the other things he cited was, in no particular order, China's contributed more to global growth in the last decade than all G7 countries put together. 1.4 billion people in China are more than all the developed world put together. They're the leading trader with 140 countries. The trade between China and ASEAN, this is amazing. The trade between China and ASEAN is bigger than the trade between the United States and the EU. So when you start going down through these things, you realize there's a certain reality here that sooner or later the Americans are going to have to accept. And my own opinion is the sooner that gets understood and accepted, the better, and that the relationship has got to get better, because if it doesn't get better, then everything I was saying about 2050, let alone 2070 or 2100, is just going off a cliff. I'm going to stop there.
One can't but wonder how much the One Belt, One Road initiatives, which supported the trade both within Asia and China's connection to natural resources and the rest of the world economy through this initiative have played a role in that outcome. Can you talk about what you see as the importance of what that initiative looks like?
Okay, well, One Belt, One Road is a perfect example of something. And I didn't know this until I was told this by John Kerry. So John Kerry told me that in, I think it was 2013, he was the senior American at one of these international meetings that Obama could not attend for one reason or another. And so he was the person who took the meeting with Xi Jinping. And Xi Jinping in that meeting said to John Kerry, by the way, let me tell you about something I'm thinking about. And he laid out the One Belt, One Road. And Kerry said to him, oh, that's very interesting. Why don't we do this together? And Xi Jinping says, that's a great idea, let's do this together. And Kerry came back to Washington, and he said before he got off the plane, the Treasury Mandarin said, cut his legs off, and there was no chance it was going to happen. So it never got to Obama's desk as kind of a strategic question. But I tell you that story because if you were reading which it is not, it is exactly what it's said, what they say it is, which is to extend a model of development into as many countries as it wanted, who desperately need it. And when I talked earlier about Chinese modernization that I attended this last Monday, so Chinese modernization, I won't go into all the details, but there basically are 5 central characteristics of it, one of which is a peaceful world. Second one of which is common prosperity. Third one of which is harmony between man and nature. So the foreign minister went through this whole thing, and then there were 5 of us asked to comment on it. And I said, in my comments, I said,
but a lot of Americans would focus on, well, we feel threatened because of China's policy towards Taiwan or towards North Korea or now towards Russia and potential partnerships there. How does your narrative around common prosperity fit into that foreign policy story, admitting that I've just picked 3 countries out of probably 120 with whom it has positive trading relationships, right?
well, obviously all of these topics are very complicated, but and what's so hard to know is when the 2 biggest countries, the 2 most powerful countries, start getting antagonistic towards one another, you know, what's causing what, right? And it may not even be a useful exercise to try to figure out what caused what. But you inspire me on one other point I wanted to make, which is this. I had thought incorrectly that when Biden became president, we would have, for the first time in history, an asset we never had before, which was an incoming president who already had a good relationship with the existing Chinese president. So when Xi Jinping was vice president and Joe Biden was vice president, the 2 of them spent about 10 days in China together and 10 days in the United States together. That's a long time for 2 people of that seniority. So when Biden became president, he had a pre-existing, in fact, I would say those 2 have spent more time together than any 2 American and Chinese presidents in history. So I thought, incorrectly, that Biden, being a good politician, would realize his first phone call would be to Xi Jinping and say, looking forward to working with you, we can do this, that, and the other thing together, blah, blah, blah. He did exactly the opposite. They literally decided, no, what we have to do is we have to talk to everybody else in the world first, particularly the allies, get us all together coherently, and then talk to the Chinese. So about 9 months elapsed before Biden and Xi Jinping ever spoke. So then I started thinking, okay, now Biden says routinely, as all American presidents have recently, the U.S.-China relationship is the most important relationship of the 21st century. Of course, I agree with that. And so then if you kind of conceptualize the President of the United States as sort of the CEO of the country, and the CEO of the country has just said, okay, the most important relationship is U.S.-China. Now, if you were running a company and you had your key people around the table, let's say your cabinet, as it were, and that was your directive, you would think that everybody who's senior ought to be all over that topic, right? So now, I've often done this sort of thought exercise in my head. If you went around the cabinet table and you said to each cabinet member, tell me the name of your Chinese counterpart, I'll bet you 90% of them couldn't tell you. Let alone if you were to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, grade your relationship with your counterpart. The answer to that would be 0. So there's a fundamental disconnect here, which to me it's almost political malpractice. And by the way, I say the same thing about the Chinese. This goes both ways. I'm picking on our own country because it's more polite to talk about your own country. It goes both ways. I mean, it's completely intolerable. Obviously, we all know just through, this is like human relations 101, right? If you want to build a relationship with someone, guess what? You got to talk to them. And if you want to build any kind of trust or even diminish fear, the better you know him or her, the better. Or even if you're wanting to make a judgment on what do I think about person A, B, or C, isn't it a good idea to spend a lot of time with him or her? They're doing none of that.
So let me ask about that, though. I mean, I think, again, many of us might think that domestic politics determines and shapes a country's foreign policy. And I happen to think that that's probably true in the U.S. as well. Why? You told the story about Kerry and Obama and how Kerry was invited to join the One Belt, One Road initiative. I'd never heard that story before.
Yeah,
we'd be in a very different position today if Obama
by the way,
yes.
Kerry goes on to say, in life you have these missed opportunities. It's the single biggest missed opportunity in my life, politically.
I mean, it certainly has completely reshaped the international development world. The World Bank, the IMF are now second fiddles, really, to that effort. But let's try and understand how the U.S. got where it is today. Going back to Obama, Trump, Biden, why haven't we been able to do better? Let's diagnose the problem. What's keeping us from communicating more, or whatever it is we should be doing at this point?
It's a very good question. I scratch my head because the consensus on China has become so overwhelming that if you say anything even close to being constructive, you're sort of viewed with a kind of suspicion. That's how bad it's gotten. So I don't know. Trying to deconstruct exactly how we got here is hard. Obviously, when Trump became president, and let me just say, Trump to me is, going back to what I was saying about Hofstadter, Trump is both symptom and cause. So if Trump didn't exist, the underlying politics are still there. He happened to have capitalized on them rather well. But the Trump story I know fairly well because in the early days, I was quite involved with it. And you remember in the beginning of the Trump period, the fear then was that trade was going to be a real problem. Mm-hmm. And I was asked by the White House to help Lighthizer on the U.S.-China trade stuff. Mm-hmm. Because his counterpart was a person called Vice Premier Liu He, who I knew very well. And so I met with Lighthizer, and I said to him, Bob, oh, by the way, I didn't know him at all. And he had a reputation for being a real hawk. So I said, Bob, there's only one model of U.S.-China relationships that I know works. And I will call it the Kissinger, Zhou, and Lai model. And that's this. The respective presidents appoint somebody who's very senior, who's very trusted, and the two presidents say to the two people, metaphorically, get in a room and don't come out until you've got a solution. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly what Kissinger and Zhou and Lai did. And so I said to Bob, that's the only model that works. You absolutely have to follow that model. Mm-hmm. And what you have to do, you can't delegate this. You have to build a relationship of trust with Liu He. I've known Liu He for 20 years. He's a good guy. He did his master's at the Kennedy School. He speaks good English. He's an elegant man. And a very bright man. And I'm telling you, whatever the result would otherwise be, it's going to be better if you do it the way I've just described. And Lighthizer, to his credit, did exactly that. And the irony is, 4 years later, the trade channel was still wide open. So during the COVID period, for example, when the White House was telling American manufacturers of medical supplies, we need all your stuff fast. And a lot of these American medical companies were manufacturing it in China. And because the Chinese COVID thing happened earlier, the Chinese government had done the same thing. They'd said to Johnson & Johnson, no, you can't export, staying here in China. So the American companies tried to tell the White House, well, we're happy to comply, but a lot of our stuff's in China, we can't get it out. And so they came to Lighthizer and to me to say, can you talk to the Chinese and get them to let the stuff out? So we went through the trade channel, and I said, we had a conference call with 5 CEOs of American medical companies. I said to them, you're going to think this is crazy, but I'm telling you this is the way to get it done. I need to know the name of the specific plant and the plant manager and his WeChat number. You give me that and I'll get it unlocked. And that's exactly what happened. But the reason I tell you the story is because notwithstanding all of the harumphing and all of the Sturm and Drang, that channel was actually very effective.
桑顿对一带一路和中国对外角色的解释，只代表一位长期与中国打交道的美国投行家的判断。项目做得怎样，不能靠依据发展合作旧改观定论，要看资金和建设是否可持续，也要看当地是否留下工作、服务和科技需使用的基础设施。但他说中了一件常被跳过的事，今天不少国家先要面对的食电、铝、港口、工行够不够用，产品能不能运出去。谁能帮助把这些条件布起来，谁的合作方案就会有现实吸引力。中国把贸易、制造和基础设施放在一条线上，背后是几十年产业积累。一个港口必须借得上生产、物流和市场，一条输电线也需要设备、工程师和稳定的需求。这也是外部世界不能只问中国影响力大了没有的原因，更要问这种影响力靠什么形成，又给合作方留下了什么能力。若只剩债务或一次性交易，合作就站不住。若能让货物更容易流通，企业更容易接单，家庭永能更稳定，介质才有现实基础。所以重新理解中国，不必把所有项目都站妹一边，也不必把每一项外部合作都当成地缘政治阴谋。先看发展条件，再看交付结果，最后看能否长期运行。这个顺序或许比先问谁要统治谁更接近真实世界。